All right, welcome everyone. So we're going to talk today about Move and DeFi, and we're going to have a great discussion here. So I'm going to introduce everyone. My name's Greg. I work at Aptos Labs. I'm an engineer in charge of DevX on Aptos. So I build a lot of the tools and everything there, and especially around Move and development and documentation as well. Let's go, of course, being the person with no introduction needed, Avery.
Hi, folks. I'm Avery, co-founder and CTO at Aptos Labs. Great to have you all here.
Hey, STANI from Avara, and we built earlier the AVERY protocol. It's basically a lending, we call it liquidity protocol, and it's on 12 different networks. Has roughly 12 billion worth of value there at the moment, and we've been building DeFi since the past 7 years, very early days of Ethereum. And then more recently, we've been building Lens protocol, which is a decentralized social network. And super excited to be here today.
Hey everybody, I'm Alex, co-founder and CEO of Econia Labs. I write code for both Econia Labs and for Aptos Core, and I build DeFi products with SHRADDHA over here as well.
Good morning, everyone. This is SHRADDHA. I'm CTO, co-founder of Panora. And we've been building on Aptos for close to a year now. We are a DEX aggregator and a front-end partner for Econia.
Great. Well, great introductions for everyone. And I'm just going to kick it off with a nice, good discussion about sort of the history of Move and why Move exists today.
Thanks for that, Greg. So for those of you who are not aware, back in 2018, Facebook kicked off a very ambitious project called Libra and Diem to change the way people think about remittances and payments for the 4 billion plus people that use all of Meta's products on a daily basis. And as a part of that process, we started to look at the infrastructure that was available to us, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other pieces in that space. And what we found was that while they were very promising, we felt that there were limitations that kind of held back that promise of decentralized infrastructure for the masses. And so what it would take is kind of a rethinking of the entire stack, from the way execution is done, storage, different protocols, to the way that smart contracts development is done as well with the Move language. And so thinking about first principles, how to design something that's safe, scalable, and that can support 5 billion internet users today. That's how we kind of came with the idea of Move. And it was something that a lot of the people that felt very passionate about it from 2018 continued their journey onto Aptos. We have folks like Sherry, David, Greg, Zakun, and many, many others. I think more than 30 people ended up coming from Novi into Aptos to kind of continue that vision of what Move could be and how we could change the way that decentralized infrastructure works for everyone.
Great. Yeah. It's funny because I actually wasn't there when they first created Move, so I love to hear sort of some of the impressions of like why that was created and who kind of worked on it.
Sure. So there are quite a number of people that worked on Move actually, beyond just the folks that are on kind of the white paper listed there. So we have an amazing team of young Wolfgang, folks like Runtian, as well as Victor, who kind of create a lot of the initial code and design elements of what Move would be over time. And I think what's also important to think about what Move is, and those folks are all joined Aptos, but what's also thinking about, and I think David was probably the first actually big user of Move in the entire ecosystem, which was very small at that time. The thing about when Move started is more about the journey of what's going with it. And so Move at that time was designed for a very permissioned environment, which was Libra. And now, in a permissionless environment, thinking about the use cases for that, and protocols like Econia and AVERY and Panora, which are also now building, we needed to make many, many different changes, such as adding objects to the language, adding other improvements for design and developer experience, such as for loops, enums, structs, as well as thinking about the performance aspects. How do you kind of build features like aggregators and randomness into the protocol and then have them actually optimize all the way down to the very low levels of the stack? That requires our full control over that entire area, from language to VM, all the way down to execution and storage. And so it's been an amazing journey for us, and we've also seen a lot of folks start to use that stack over time. You can see movement and other protocols like it, Roosh protocol as well, starting to pick up the Aptos Move VM, and also very excited about things like the compiler v2 that are coming up in the future, and making this really about a community project that everyone can use and everyone can benefit from.
Yeah, and so that's a good start for sort of like how Move had developed over time. But now that we have some people here who have developed a Move, I'd love to know what your first impressions are on building a Move and in comparison to other languages as well.
So I first learned about Move in April of 2022. And my first impression was that this is part of a fully integrated tech stack built by engineers at Facebook. And if anyone can build a scalable system, it's Facebook engineers. And 2 years later, I'd say that intuition has proved largely correct. My background personally is embedded systems. I worked on avionics. And I found there's a large carryover between the low-level systems code that I've worked on in my career before crypto and the spec-driven development with the coverage and unit testing and Move. I sometimes talk to my older friends and from previous jobs, and I say that it's like C but dumber, which is actually an improvement for me because it improves the safety of the language and it comes with this blazing fast performance. And I'd say that in the early days, a lot of the Move programming language, like, it wasn't necessarily hiccups, it was more so trade-offs. It was an early ecosystem, there wasn't as much documentation, and so you kind of had to become one with the code, and you had to become one with block STM, but in the end that results in a more fully integrated tech stack for any dApp who's willing to put in the work and understand how much performance you really can squeeze out of this language and the system that it's built on, which is Aptos.
I think we started developing with Move in 2023, so it's been like an year. And having experimented with other languages, what I can say is it has been pretty smooth so far. We didn't face any challenges, the reason being it's pretty simple. So I think when we started working on Panora, it's within that we actually started interacting with Move as well. And it has been super easy, reason being there was a lot of developer documentation that was already available. And Aptos community has been super helpful in resolving any issues. And of course, the Aptos engineering team as well. So I think the design principles, the framework on which the Move language itself is built, I think that's super easy to grasp for any developer to start building on Aptos.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I think I've helped both of these guys from the time that they've been working at different hackathons, actually. I would love to know, though, like how your opinions have changed over time, because that's like your first impression. But now that you've finally gotten to it, like, what are the things that you see are good with it, and what can you possibly see that you want next?
I think what we would be looking at is more of interoperability between different DEXs that we are working with, especially as aggregators. We integrate with a lot of DEXs and aggregators and, of course, the on-chain order book as well. But I think there's no standard interface that we have, like, where every DEX can probably come up with one standard and it's easy for anybody to start building with a particular protocol. I think that's what we would be looking forward to, not specifically anything to Move, but probably something to do with protocols.
Yep. Personally, I'm excited for everything that's coming in the V2 compiler. Like I said earlier, it's a very bare bones language right now, and I think that's actually excellent for building programs that squeeze all the performance you can out of the runtime. And as far as getting familiar with like first principles in the design process, having zero training wheels can be very helpful. And I think that extending it with things that make it more like the Rust programming language will make it more useful in terms of abstractions and maybe add more design patterns that can be easily implemented. But with even just the original opcodes that came with Move, I think that it's nice to know that we can basically write like assembly code and it will perform like that on chain if you know the right way to squeeze things out of the system. And I would add that my views on Move have changed in some sense, because in the beginning I was initially an enthusiast just because I enjoyed programming the language so much. But as things have evolved, I really see it as a means to an end. Like I mentioned earlier, Move was developed in concert with the consensus stack, with all of the different memory models, with the storage of the Aptos blockchain from the ground up. And I'm building on the Aptos blockchain not just because I like programming in Move as much as I like programming in Move, but I'm building on the Aptos blockchain because there are things that it offers that would prohibit me from building the product I've built anywhere else.
And it would be great then to sort of like, you're talking about, you wouldn't build it anywhere else. What can developers, is this working? Hello? What can developers go to do and start learning about Aptos Move and Move in general, and how they can get to the point where they actually can build applications as well?
I think the key to start building any application would be to start small. So when we started experimenting with Move and started building on Aptos, we started with writing simple smart contracts so that we understand what Move is all about. So I would suggest that, start small, start understanding the language better, go through the libraries, go through the communities, start going through the developer documentation, write simple code to understand where you are and start building it from there. And that would be my one piece of suggestion, rather than going all in and developing application right from the beginning.
Yeah, I would say just making the conscious choice to dive in is most of the battle. When I started programming in Move and learning the Move language, there was almost nothing, and I was harassing this guy in Discord and Cocoon about how to use the bytecode loader. And there's so much more documentation and tutorials now to make things easier. And I sort of lament that wasn't available, but again, that's a trade-off, because in the beginning of the ecosystem, then you have a lot of opportunity to learn the first principles and to have input on how future designs are made. There's plenty of new content on the Aptos doc site, of course, for all these, for all this onboarding. And of course, our project at least has been open source since inception. So anyone who wants to look through the Econia repo or Econia Labs organization, we've built tutorial lists. We've built walkthroughs from previous hackathons. You can look through the Econia source code and see how we implemented a custom binary search tree. You can run the unit test yourself. And I think that you do have to become one a little bit with the language and the Aptos framework in order to build the right mental model. But once you get there, a lot of it clicks, and the design behind all this is so elegant and I think beautiful in a way that enables performance that you really can't get anywhere else. And so you won't really see that until you start to play around and just hack with it and iterate and compose.
That's great. From the performance and all that are talking about, let's go into the fact that why would you build DeFi here? Like, you're talking about great advantages there. I'd love to know what people's opinions are on why Move and Aptos is the right place to build this DeFi.
Let's give this to STANI.
Yeah.
Put him on the hot seat.
Well, I think there was like very good argumentation already about why basically Move and why Aptos, and I think DeFi is kind of like a natural first step, obviously because blockchain enable a lot of this financial transactioning, and I think it's always kind of like a first mover when you have like a relatively big ecosystem. So DeFi comes first, and that creates a financial liquidity layer, and then you can build applications that are maybe like less financial. So I think DeFi is definitely something that really has to exist pretty much everywhere. I tend to think about DeFi the same way as I think, like if we take some analogy, like networks are kind of like cities, and DeFi is like the bank in a city. So you need those kind of rails in every city, and I think that's the natural first step, and that plugs into everything that people want to actually do on Aptos, and I do think that from like more of like a technical intellectual perspective, the security aspect is very fascinating. So the fact that you can actually build a little bit more securely is interesting for DeFi developers. And over the years, I think building early on Ethereum, a lot of the tooling didn't really exist. So processes, tooling, things like formal verification wasn't a thing in DeFi applications. Where you mentioned you were doing previously, like you were building, what industry you were working previously that you mentioned?
Yeah, my background in what I might call paranoid programming is from aerospace.
High assurance, Alex. High assurance programming.
High assurance, yes, programming. I worked on, it's a specification called DO-178B Level A, and it governs elements in an aircraft that if they fail, the whole system fails. So things that control flight navigation rather than maybe the circuit for the TV on the back of the seat.
Yeah, that's really cool. But like, it's basically like mission critical software, and DeFi is a little bit the same. That if kind of like if a like protocol has some sort of vulnerability, the stakes are really high, and the more time passes, these stakes are just growing significantly. And when we started build on Ethereum, obviously we kind of like were thinking that these systems could be used globally. I believe that decentralized finance will be that financial layer for everyone at some point. And obviously you need network supports that can actually scale to billions of people. So I do believe that, and the technology is here with Aptos, with Move. But it just showcases that kind of like how much we need to think about that mission critical aspect and the security, and having that tooling around is very important. So I do think that the more better tooling there is and a culture for security, the more it actually will attract developers and builders to come to the space and actually build this infrastructure with high stakes as well. So that's kind of like my excitement from more of a technical perspective, and seeing like fellow developers. Obviously, we don't have a Move-based protocol or a product yet, but we're constantly researching, and it's amazing to see that there's developers that are thinking also from that security mindset as well.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up some good points, especially about the formal verification and the Move prover that's only on Aptos. Maybe Alex can probably give something about that. I don't know. He's does the most testing out of anyone on the Aptos blockchain.
Yeah, when the Econia v4 protocol went live on mainnet, I believe it had more unit tests than the entire Aptos framework. And the protocol is tested to 100% coverage, which means that if you look through every possible execution path, that everything has a test written for it. This is something that this design sort of pattern and testing I inherited from my background in embedded systems and system critical code. And a lot of this is built straight into the Aptos command line. And the testing framework that developers use makes it much easier for them to write tests in a way that would normally be inconvenient in other environments. So it does create this culture of security, as you mentioned. And the formal specifications allow for people to prove properties about their code, which is useful in situations where you might have some kind of invariant, meaning a property has to be satisfied, and you can actually write a formal specification, and you can prove that that will hold in all circumstances. You don't just write tests that look at individual use cases. And as DeFi grows, and as the visibility on one particular system increases, yes, you can have increases in the amount of assets managed 10x overnight in a month. And these kinds of systems have to be able to scale not just in terms of throughput, but in terms of the security and the design patterns that go into making sure the underlying assets are safe.
Now I know who I'm going to call when I need some tests to be written.
I'll just add in a couple points. So one thing that Alex mentioned around the formal verification, STANI mentioned as well, the Aptos framework itself is formally verified for security properties. And that allows you to provide this base layer of security, and then you build on top of that with the protocols that Econia is doing, or Panora is doing, or maybe hopefully AVERY one day. You get this nice layer of composability on top of that, which is also secure. And now when you have this composability between these protocols, you're going to trust not just protocol A or B or C, but the whole host of those coming together and having really a new paradigm of security for DeFi going forward. And that's what we think is really necessary for us to advance beyond, I think yesterday, STANI mentioned $100 billion of TVL are locked up, to getting to trillions of dollars of TVL locked up in the space, and feeling very secure and safe about that. And it also gives us a chance to do fun things as well. I mean, Alex and I, we talk about one day doing a NASDAQ on chain, or pushing the boundaries of other kind of financial primitives that are on chain, if you can have very massive security, scalability, and latency over time as well. So there's a lot to be done here, and there's a lot of excitement for kind of the future of what this space can do going forward.
Yeah, and it's great to be showing off the fact that at the core layer, there's that safety and protection around the formal verification and the testing. I mean, I haven't worked too much in other ecosystems over time. I think STANI probably has a better knowledge of the way that things used to be in blockchain things as well. Do you have any comments on like that comparison to other blockchains?
Yeah, I mean, there isn't really that much stuff available. There's few open source frameworks, but I haven't really seen them being utilized that much. I mean, the Aave DAO, so basically the way Aave works is that the Aave protocol is governed by the Aave DAO, and Aave Labs, which is part of Avara, is contributing to the Aave DAO, is one of the technical contributors amongst others. And there's also security contributors, so there's basically teams that are working on the manual security audits, for example, when there's new code. And also there's a team that is working on formal verification. The company is SHRADDHA, and they do a lot of great work on in our space on actually formally verifying these DeFi protocols. But for example, in their case, the tech is proprietary technology, so it's not really open source. So I really kind of like the idea that you have this verifier that is open source and anyone can use, and the whole community can write properties and rules around not just about like specific protocol, but any kind of properties that are on chain. And I think that's a really big benefit because the more people can write rules, the more coverage there's going to be. So I think that's a kind of like a comparison. And I think overall, like the DeFi security is really still kind of a nascent area. It's been evolving over the years. I do think that the Aptos ecosystem has attracted really good security partners. I've read a lot of reports from Zelic and OtterSec and a couple of other security auditors, and there's like a lot of great people in the community, and you don't really find that the same kind of expertise in other networks. And that is something that when I think about DeFi and expansion and what to think about new technology, is that what is the security culture and who are involved. Obviously, it's always not as easy to get Ethereum maxis to get excited about new types of technologies that are not necessarily in the Ethereum roadmap, but having very strong security contributors that are excited about the technology and the opportunity is really strong signal. And I think kind of Aptos as an ecosystem has been able to somehow do that. And I think it goes back to what you're all saying, that the engineering started all the way from Facebook and thinking about how to build globally, and how to build billions of people, and how to construct that technology. So I think that might be the one of the reasons there. But yeah, it's been amazing to follow the progress and be kind of like lurking a little bit around what's happening.
Nice, yeah. We've been talking a lot about security, so I want to get into a different fun topic about parallelism and how parallelism applies in Move. So there's been a lot of talk, especially on Twitter, about dynamic parallelism versus static parallelism, along with optimistic versus pessimistic. I'd love to hear your opinions on it.
How should we start? Alex, you want to go, or you want to?
Yeah, I think that this actually is a means to an end, which was earlier you talked about why building on Aptos and Move, and I think it comes down to the composability that you can get by having a monolithic L1 that has a gigantic pool of shared network state. And if there is state that's sharded across different, whether it's app chains or L2s or rollups, those have this this clunky at times interface problem where you can't access something on one area of the network unless it goes through a bottleneck somewhere and maybe pops out somewhere else. And that is solved by essentially dumping everything into one giant hard drive, which is what Aptos is in some sense. But you cannot do that unless the system itself can run efficiently to keep costs low, because then you just run into the same kind of issues that maybe Ethereum L1 has, which is everything is in that one pool of information, but the pool of information is just really slow to be modified. And Aptos solves these problems essentially with its brand of parallelism, which allows for executions to execute or transactions to execute at the same time. Alice can pay Bob while CAD can pay D, and those transactions can happen at the same time. But Aptos wasn't necessarily the first to have done this. Solana, I think, actually ushered in this era of parallelism at the monolithic L1 layer and proved in some sense that this is almost required for web scale. But the implementation that they chose forced some limitations on developers, and in particular for a protocol that I'm working on, and a fully on-chain order book, it introduced this trade-off, which is essentially between atomic settlement and permissionless market making, and it means that you can either settle a trade during the transaction when it was placed, or you have to, or you can allow anyone to trade, but you can't have both of those things, and that's a trade-off that isn't required on Aptos, and this is ultimately a result of essentially some database theory and the way that transactions are managed, which might be beyond the scope of the discussion. Of course, I'm always glad to chat about it after this with anyone who's interested, but the main takeaway is that the Aptos brand of parallelism enables operations at scale that cannot be done anywhere else, and it unlocks a new form of composability at the L1 layer that allows you to chain your DeFi transaction into maybe some kind of NFT gated feature, and then you can take the output of that and put it somewhere else, and you can do that all at one time. Maybe refinance a loan with a flash loan. Who knows? All in one transaction, and these kinds of operations are really only possible on the Aptos network.
Yeah, I'll just jump in a little bit there. I think this has been something that's really different about what Aptos is designed with compared to other blockchains. As Alex mentioned, we're not the first to parallelism. Solana was definitely there, but we want to do much more than I would have done in the past in that space. And you can't have a parallelized order book, for instance, with the way the dependency management is done, because you have to lock the kind of the root of the tree, and then you can't do, everything after that becomes sequential. With Aptos, we handle dynamic parallelism, which is kind of the last late stage runtime parallelism that can only be done there, and it allows things that you might think that are not parallelizable to be parallelizable. In some sense, it's the most optimistic, the most optimal form of concurrency that's available in the system, because you're running and only determine dependencies at that runtime. And with that, we can actually add things like static hints to it and make it even more performant over time. But one thing, going back to what I said earlier, was when we designed Move, we also made it in a way like it's less about the language itself and more about the fact that you control the entire stack from top to bottom. And you do things like aggregators, where things that even if you have, say, a mint of NFTs, which appears to be sequential, NFT with index 0, 1, 2, 3, in Move and Aptos, you can actually do that mostly in parallel. And then maybe at the very end, assign the sequence numbers to those operations. And you can do 1 million NFTs in 90 seconds in the Aptos stack. And so being able to support things like that, so be able to support the block STM fork, and also do things that just aren't possible in their ecosystems, is something that we've been really proud of and really excited to take forward as we reach this journey towards 5 billion plus internet users.
Wow, Avery. It's a lot.
Aggregators are black magic. I love those things.
The aggregators are
Dark magic.
amazing. Yeah. I completely lost my place now. Great. Well, any other specific DeFi-only things that can only be on Aptos that anyone that want to comment on? Or any hurdles that they...
Actually, I wanted to ask a question, if it's okay, for Panora.
Yeah, let's hear it.
So I think one thing that's been interesting from a theoretical perspective from us is, like, when you think about DEX aggregators, as you work through a lot of these routing for different places to get the less slippage and all that. How do you think about the fact that the fees are really low in Aptos, and then does that really help you a lot with giving more paths to follow and more options for users to find that best path?
Yeah, I think low transaction fees or low gas fees has been instrumental in getting more volumes. Now that honestly, as a DEX aggregator, we started off we had the full-fledged product as part of our recent rebranding with multi-hop and transaction split in place, and it's been a month now, and we have seen a surge in volumes. Earlier we were doing around 50K on an average basis or daily basis. Now it is close to 750 to 1 million without having to spend anything on marketing, and it's all organic. And the reason that I can think of for the surge is definitely the low gas fees. And we have also asked our users like what makes them come to Panora or any DEX aggregator for that matter on Aptos to transact, and gas fees is one of the main reasons. And I think that was also one of the main reasons for us to build on Aptos, because gas fees is instrumental for anybody to just come and trade. Apart from the obvious technical advancements of Move and Aptos.
Yeah, actually, I want to bring up one feature that I want to ask you guys about. The fact that normally when you work in like Ethereum or something, you use MetaMask, and it doesn't tell you what's going to happen from the actual trade. So if I go and try to swap something, I might not actually see what actually is going to happen. But how do you feel about the experience on Aptos, where it will actually be able to simulate the transaction, tell you what the actual things that will happen in that trade?
Yeah, I think this particular part has really helped us build the product on Aptos, because right now, like, there are a lot of features that we keep building, and even the smallest of the improvements that we do on a daily basis are possible, and we are able to ship faster because of the simulation capabilities that Aptos provides. Because we are dealing with user funds, we need to be really careful about what we are shipping, and I think simulation has really helped us a lot there. And definitely one of the most important things for any developer to build on Aptos. If you're able to see how it's going to ship, I think that makes it super easy to build.
I think that is a really cool feature. So like, I think on Ethereum you can use like some sort of like a third-party service like Tenderly for that. But that's the whole exciting thing about this ecosystem and the stack, that there's just like, it feels kind of like the next generation of what on-chain should be, basically, from that tooling perspective and user experience perspective. And I think the more like time passes and gas fees effectively are lower, the more we start to think about consumer, right? So it's kind of like, feels the same thing as with internet. As the bandwidth increases, we have to think about, well, how we're handling not just like static data, but dynamic data, video and audio and whatnot. So I kind of feel that it's similar moment, and the more we have to think about like the end user as a consumer as well. But that's a really cool feature.
I would add that any marginal decrease in gas fees obviously results in a better user experience for any existing application, simply because the fees are lower. But a sufficiently large drop in gas fees is actually a qualitative step change because of the new kinds of applications that it enables. An order book just wouldn't really be possible on Ethereum L1. I mean, throwback to Ether Delta, but didn't really work that well. And that's because placing a limit order canceling it is simply too expensive. But on Econia, made possible by Aptos, it costs 0.02 of a cent to place a limit order, cancel a limit order, which means that market makers can actually integrate on-chain, fully on-chain, in the same way that they would integrate with a centralized exchange, and they'll experience marginal gas costs that allow them to just quote the spread the way they would on Binance, but doing it in a fully permissionless and transparent way that provides the DeFi experience that this is all about, which is open finance and more global access.
Well, so that's great. What we should talk about next then is what you guys see 5-10 years from now in DeFi, and I guess I will start with Avery.
Okay, 5-10 years out from now, I really hope that we have, a lot of the centralized exchange volume moving to decentralized exchanges. I definitely want to see a couple of those large exchanges like NASDAQ, ADGMs starting to really have a lot of that volume move on chain, and it may not be on the Aptos mainnet. It may be like a subnet of that, because you need certain latency properties that are going to be very hard to do in a globally decentralized network. But at the same time, I think in 5 to 10 years, we're going to have well over 1 million transactions per second, maybe even 10 million by then, in terms of what we can do as a pure network itself. And with the kind of way that the DeFi ecosystem here is growing, this community in 5 or 10 years will be thousands of developers. It will be tens of millions of users. And we'll start to see a world where people can permissionally transact with each other and interoperate in finance in a way that will change the way the fabric of society is laid out today. And so, maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 10 years, maybe it's 20 years, I don't know. But that's definitely the future we're building towards and something we really want to see happen.
STANI?
Yeah, 5-10 years. I think we're going to be cyborgs by then.
We'll all be AIs by then, I guess.
Yeah. We don't need to think anymore. But I do think the getting kind of like the more traditional finance on chain is very interesting, and I also think that's like, especially like thinking more and more what Aptos can do as a technology. I'm starting to think more about the kind of idea where we exchange a lot of value. You mentioned about like Ether Delta and how clunky it was to place an order and whatnot, and that's basically swapping some of the early tokens, and there's more and more value kind of like coming on chain. So obviously there's governance tokens that are governing DeFi protocols that are earning cash income. There's all different types of communities, investment DAOs, and obviously there's meme coins as well. So there's like mimetic brand value as well on chain. So something else could be very interesting progression is that how we can actually exchange more, put more value on chain that didn't exist before, because maybe it was just didn't make sense, or there isn't a way to account the value, and then how we can actually exchange that value. So things like, for example, like transacting by scrolling a social media feed, exchanges value between what you might be paying for that feed and rewarding other users, for example, or scrolling, for example, the internet, going into different web pages, and based on your activity, automatically exchanging value. Because also exchanging value should be as seamless as happening in the background within your kind of like limitations and scope. Or just walking on the street or driving in a car, going to a restaurant, and you see this kind of like a value exchanging between the services that you might be using. So maybe the future is that with the blockchain, is that we kind of like are doing things as we do normally, and behind the scenes, we get rewarded from using things like car sharing services, restaurants, and whatnot, and become owners of those, and also part of owners of the infrastructure we're using. So I think that could be very interesting, especially online, and bringing that on-chain component to existing online environment. And this is what we were talking yesterday with Mo. What he mentioned is that it's a very weird concept to go read an article and get a banner of like, subscribe, where it's kind of like that type of a payment thing fits to the old model of like limitations of the infrastructure and payment rails that internet had before. But if the technology enables now to actually transfer and exchange value every single second and less than a second, and settle that value with hundreds of people and even more, you will probably see this type of a value exchange coming. And that financialization doesn't need to be kind of like at present on every transaction you do, but it's just something that accumulates in the background with very nice design. So I think that might be like a really exciting progress for DeFi as well.
When I think about the long-term future of blockchains and their integration with society, it makes me think of the game theory book Non-Zero by Robert Wright. And I'll paraphrase that humanity extends itself by increasing the number of non-zero sum games that it can play. And blockchains unlock non-zero sumness in an unprecedented manner. And legal and inertial problems notwithstanding, I already see that we're on the cusp of the TradFi exodus, if you want to call it that. I think that certain entrenched institutions will take longer than others, but there are already premier use cases that are starting to set themselves up. I think that the advent of stablecoins, in particular non-USD backed ones, enables a proxy for Forex markets, and blockchains are the ideal place to put this activity. There's essentially guaranteed deliverability baked into the asset. If you have a stablecoin, by definition. Somewhere it can be redeemed for fiat. Stable, Forex markets are not governed by any one jurisdiction. It's most logical to have them in a place that no one country owns on the blockchain. And a lot of the emerging markets where people have the super app on their phone that is their social media and their payments and their communications, a lot of these emerging apps have crypto baked into it, which is just another on-ramp for this kind of thing. And I think that's one of the earlier use cases. Obviously, there's the DeFi and the trading and the on-chain order books, I think, is right now in this proving stage where a lot of traditional players are getting interested. Obviously, tokenization has been hot lately, and I think that will come in fits and spurts. I don't necessarily know how much liquidity there will be for fractionalized shares of a specific hotel in New York, but it's moving in the right direction, and I think that it will only continue to move that way. And I do think that the integration with all these different apps in terms of the microtransactions, the social interactions, is pretty mind-boggling for me to think about the amount of indexing that is going to have to be done to make sense of it all, but it's certainly possible, and the throughput is only increasing year by year, and I think we're observing certain form of Moore's law applied to blockchains that I can only expect will continue to support even more throughput. And so I'm excited to see this play out. I think it's notoriously difficult to predict timelines for, technological revolutions of the kind, but we're in the middle of one, and so it's exciting to just see it all play out with all of you.
I think AVERY, STANI, and Alex have covered it all. But just one point to add is DeFi word is still very daunting for Web2 users. They are overwhelmed when they hear about Web3 and DeFi. So I think next 5 to 10 years, what people can focus on in this space is coming up with simple yet powerful applications where people do not even understand there's something related to blockchain at the back end. So I think that will be very powerful in the next 5 to 10 years, like coming up with super easy and powerful applications to use without people having to understand the nuances of Web3 jargons or the DeFi jargon. I think that would be key.
Yeah, honestly, it would be really easy then if I could go to the currency exchange and not have to look at the giant sign and try to figure out which symbol is the right one for me, and then attempt to speak to someone who doesn't know my language to exchange the currency.
And pay 200 bips.
Yeah, that's also true. I walked around a couple blocks down here, and there's actually a corner that has, I think, 4 currency exchanges on it, and they all have different rates. So that's a live market there for your order book right there. So with this, we have the future of DeFi. What about Move? Is there any features that you guys are looking forward to in the future, things that you want to see that are built or that can really change the landscape of building in future?
Well, I've already filed plenty of GitHub issues, so I'll just point people to my GitHub, but a lot of it's in compiler v2, and I think that generally the design principle of a fully open source compiler, I mean, if this is going to become GCC for blockchain, then that paradigm itself is the killer feature, and I think it's on that road. So, in the short term, I'll continue asking for enums and pub structs and whatever, but I think generally it's moving in the right direction. So I'm just excited to see that flywheel taking off.
Yeah, and I know that you talked about making sure that Web2 users aren't afraid of essentially Web3, and the best way to do that would be hiding that. And we have a couple features around that, around keyless and as well as passkeys that kind of hide that. Do you see that as the future of adoption for Web2?
Yeah, I think definitely, because Web2 users are already very well versed and accustomed to using keyless accounts or passkeys. Even today, when I talk to my friends in Web2 world, they don't understand what a seed phrase means, and they can't keep it safe. I think that is key to actually start transactions when it comes to Web3 or DeFi, where they don't even have to remember anything. It's just available on mobile or just with their biometrics. So I think that would be key, and I think Aptos is moving in the right direction when it comes to keyless accounts and passkeys, and hopefully we'll see a lot of adoption in this space.